My son thought I hadn't noticed him putting something strange in my backpack, smiling as if nothing had happened. But when he turned away, I quietly put it in his drawer. 30 minutes later, the police arrived. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Terry's fist slammed against the oak table. The salt shaker toppled, scattering white crystals across the surface like broken glass. My fork froze halfway to my mouth, a piece of meatloaf still impaled on the tines. Dad, we need another 2,000 this month. The words hit harder than his fist had hit the table. I set my fork down slowly, deliberately, the metal clinking against the ceramic plate. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. Zella sat across from me, her wedding ring catching the overhead light as she twisted it around her finger. Her makeup was smudged beneath her eyes. She'd been crying before dinner. Enough. The word came out sharper than I intended. You're 28, Terry. It's time to learn to provide for your wife yourself. He towered over me, his face flushed with anger or desperation. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference with my son. The refrigerator hummed behind him, a steady drone that filled the spaces between our heavy breathing. You're being selfish. Terry's voice cracked slightly. Mom would have understood us. She would have helped. The mention of Martha struck like a physical blow. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands clench involuntarily. Zella's quiet sobbing began, muffled by the napkin she pressed to her face. The green beans on my plate had gone cold, congealing in their butter sauce. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the linoleum with a harsh grating sound that made Zella flinch. The overhead fixture cast harsh shadows across all our faces, turning this family dinner into something resembling an interrogation. I've given you $1,200 this month alone, I said, standing slowly. My niece protested. I wasn't as young as I used to be. Before that, it was the wedding venue, the apartment deposit you never used, Zella's medical bills. Dad, please. No, I stepped away from the table, away from them both, the smell of cooling meatloaf mixed with the tension thick enough to cut. I won't enable this anymore. Terry's breathing was heavy, ragged. Zella had stopped crying, but her eyes remained fixed on her plate, as if the pattern on the china could solve all our problems. The clock above the sink ticked toward 7:35. I walked toward the kitchen doorway, not looking back. My footsteps felt heavier than usual, each one a small defeat. Behind me, I heard Zella whisper something to Terry, urgent and pleading. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear enough. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed toward my bedroom. Each step carried me further from the wreckage of another family dinner, another failed attempt at connection. Below, their voices rose again. Terry's anger, Zella's tears, the familiar symphony of dysfunction that had become our household soundtrack. The upstairs hallway stretched before me, dark except for the light spilling from my bedroom doorway. Inside, Martha's photograph waited on the nightstand, frozen in a moment when our family still made sense. I closed the bedroom door behind me and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under my weight, springs protesting after 30 years of use. Martha's side remained undisturbed, the pillows still arranged exactly as she'd left them 5 years ago. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from exhaustion, from the bone-deep weariness that comes from fighting the same battle over and over, never gaining ground. The photograph on the nightstand showed Martha in her blue dress, the one she'd worn for our 25th anniversary cruise. Her smile was radiant, genuine. I picked up the frame, traced her face with my thumb. The glass was warm under the bedside lamps. Glow, she would have understood us, Terry had said. Maybe Martha always saw the best in everyone, especially our son, but she also believed in consequences, in teaching rather than enabling. 2 years ago, I'd sold my vintage Harley to pay for their wedding venue deposit. The bike had been my pride and joy, a 1970 Height Sportster I'd restored myself after Martha died. I told myself it was for love, for family. But Terry had barely thanked me, already asking about honeymoon expenses before the check cleared. 18 months later came the apartment security deposit. I'd canceled my planned fishing trip to Alaska, the one I'd been saving for since retirement. $3,000 that should have bought me mountains and solitude instead went to a landlord for an apartment they never moved into. Some excuse about changed circumstances. 6 months ago, it was Zella's medical bills. I worked overtime at 57 years old, my back screaming from construction sites I should have left behind. Every extra dollar went to specialists and tests that revealed nothing more serious than stress-induced migraines. I opened the nightstand drawer. Inside lay the stack of loan documents Terry had convinced me to sign over the past 2 years. Personal loans, credit applications, emergency fund withdrawals, my signature on each one, written in moments of paternal weakness. The paper felt thin between my fingers, fragile as my resolve had been. $47,000. That's what my son's emergencies had cost me since Martha's funeral. $47,000 that should have secured my retirement, instead of financing his irresponsibility. Martha's perfume bottle still sat on the dresser, nearly empty but uncapped. Sometimes I opened it just to remember. Tonight the scent seemed accusatory, rather than comforting. In the mirror above the dresser, I saw an old man, tired eyes, graying hair, shoulders bent from carrying burdens that weren't mine to bear. When had I become this person? When had love become synonymous with financial rescue? Martha's last words echoed in the quiet room. Teach him to fly on his own, Ray. Don't let him live in our shadow forever. I closed the drawer firmly. The stack of loan documents disappeared behind the wooden panel, like evidence of my failures as a father. Below, their voices had dropped to urgent whispers. I could make out Terry's tone, pleading now instead of demanding. Zella's responses came in short bursts, as if she were giving instructions. Setting the photograph back on the nightstand, I turned off the bedside lamp. Darkness wrapped around me, but I didn't lie down. Instead, I sat in the quiet, listening to the house settle, to the muffled conversation downstairs, to the sound of my own breathing gradually slowing to normal. Tomorrow would be different. It had to be. The coffee maker gurgled its familiar morning song, steam rising from the glass carf like incense in a church. I'd been awake since 5:30, unable to sleep after the night's revelations. The kitchen felt different in the early morning light, cleaner somehow, as if the darkness had washed away yesterday's confrontation. I stood at the sink in my workclothes, flannel shirt and jeans that smelled faintly of sawdust from my garage workshop. Outside the window, the neighbor's dog was barking at something invisible. Mrs. Peterson's newspaper lay in her driveway, waiting for her to shuffle out in her bathrobe. Footsteps on the stairs announced Terry's arrival. He appeared in the doorway at 7:05, wrinkled t-shirt hanging loose over boxer shorts. His hair stuck up at odd angles and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He avoided looking at me directly. "Coffee is fresh," I said without turning around. My voice sounded normal, controlled. "Good, thanks." The word came out as barely more than a mumble. I heard him fumbling with a mug, the ceramic clicking against the coffee pot as his hands shook slightly. Zella entered 2 minutes later, bathrobe wrapped tight around her small frame. Her hair was unkempt, yesterday's makeup smudged beneath puffy eyes. She'd been crying again. Or maybe she'd never stopped. "Good morning," she said tentatively, hopefully, as if the right words might repair the damage from last night. I nodded without speaking. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, broken only by the coffee maker's final hiss and the distant rumble of the newspaper delivery truck. I methodically washed last night's dinner dishes, my hands moving through the familiar motions. Plate, rinse, soap, scrub. The water was almost too hot, but I welcomed the slight burn against my skin. It felt like clarity. Behind me, Terry poured coffee with unsteady hands. The liquid splashed slightly, drops hitting the counter with tiny impacts. Zella attempted to make toast, but the smell of burning bread soon filled the kitchen. She scraped the charred surface over the sink, black crumbs falling like ash. "I'm going out today," Terry announced, his voice defensive before I'd even responded. "Job interviews." I turned from the sink, finally meeting his eyes. They darted away immediately, focusing on his coffee mug instead. "Take the house key," I said quietly. The implication hung in the air. He might not be back, or maybe I wouldn't be here when he returned. Terry's face flushed, but he didn't argue. The morning sunlight streaming through the window highlighted dust motes dancing in the space between us. Everything felt suspended, waiting. I could hear my own heartbeat in the silence, steady and determined. Terry grabbed an apple from the bowl on the counter instead of sitting for breakfast. His sneakers squeaked against the linoleum as he paced toward the doorway, then back again. Nervous energy radiated from him like heat from a furnace. "Terry," I said, stopping him mid-pace. He turned, hope flickering in his eyes for just a moment. "Responsibility," I said simply. "It's not a dirty word." The hope died, his jaw tightened, and without another word he left the kitchen. Seconds later, the front door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Zella remained at the table, her burnt toast untouched on its plate. She looked at me with pleading eyes, mouth opening as if to speak, but I was already moving, pouring my coffee into a travel mug, heading toward the garage. My truck's engine turned over on the first try, a reliable rumble that had never let me down. As I backed out of the driveway, I could see Zella through the kitchen window, alone with the mess of our interrupted breakfast, and the weight of whatever secrets she and Terry shared. The morning stretched ahead of me, full of possibility and dread in equal measure. Terry's animated voice reached me before I saw him. The front door had barely closed behind me when he jumped up from the sofa, his face bright with an excitement that seemed almost frantic. "Dad, I'm sorry about yesterday. TechForge Solutions hired me." The words hit me like a surprise punch. I set my lunch cooler down carefully on the hardwood floor, my work-worn hands suddenly unsteady. Terry bounded toward me with arms outstretched, pulling me into an embrace that lasted too long, held too tight. "Really?" The hope in my voice surprised me. "That's wonderful, son." Zella burst into theatrical applause from her perch in the armchair, her hands coming together in sharp staccato claps. Her makeup was perfect, too perfect for someone who'd been crying yesterday. The bright smile painted across her face didn't quite reach her eyes. "He got the call this afternoon," she announced as if she were narrating a game show. "Senior IT consultant position." Terry released me, but stayed close, running his hands through his hair in that nervous gesture I'd known since his childhood. His shirt was crisp, freshly ironed. When had he found time to do laundry? "I knew you had it in you," I said, feeling my shoulders relax for the first time in days. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the living room windows caught the dust motes dancing between us, making everything seem softer, more forgiving. "When do you start?" "Monday. They want me immediately." Terry's response came too quickly, as if he'd rehearsed it. His voice pitched slightly higher than usual. The familiar weight of parental pride mixed with relief began settling in my chest.